He was a judge, a respected man, a man whose word was law across 3 territories. And he was the most dangerous kind of monster, the kind nobody believes is a monster at all. But one woman survived him. She walked 100 miles through Montana summer, carrying nothing but the names of the dead and the truth burned into her own skin. This is the story of what happened when she finally stopped running. What this story teaches us: one woman's testimony, spoken plainly and without flinching, can bring down an empire built on silence. On this channel, we tell the stories the West tried to bury, tales of love that endures, of mothers who never stop searching, of strangers who choose compassion over convenience, and of ordinary people who stand up when it costs them everything. Like this video, share it with someone who believes the truth still matters, leave a comment with your city, and subscribe, because the next story is already waiting.
The road to Copper Creek was little more than a hardened scar in the earth, baked by 6 weeks of relentless sun. Silas rode it like he did everything in his life, slow, steady, and alone. His horse, a contrary buckskin he called Drummer, yanked hard to the left. Silas corrected him with his knee and kept his gaze fixed on the horizon. He was in a foul mood, having spent all morning at the bank arguing over a loan he knew he was not going to get. Then Drummer just stopped cold. The horse planted his hooves and flat out refused to move another inch. His ears were pinned back, his nostrils wide. "What in the world is it now?" Silas grumbled. He leaned over the saddle. "Get a move on, you stubborn beast." That is when he saw it, a dark heap of something in the road about 30 yards away. It was too large for a coyote, and way too still to be anything living. But Drummer smelled something, and that horse never spooked at a dead animal. Silas swung down, tied the reins to a rock, and started walking. The sun beat down on his neck like a branding iron. With every step he could feel his own heart pounding. When he finally got close, he saw it was a woman, face down in the dust. She was wearing a heavy long-sleeved wool dress buttoned all the way up to her throat. It was soaked through with sweat and stuck to her body. One of her shoes was gone, the other was falling apart. "Ma'am?" He knelt down beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" There was no reply. He touched her shoulder and pulled his hand back fast. Her skin was on fire. He gently rolled her over. Her face was red and blistered, her lips cracked and white. Her eyelids fluttered, and a tiny, broken sound escaped her throat. "No. Easy now," he said softly. "I am not going to hurt you." Her wild eyes flew open. They were a mix of gray and green, and she looked at him with the same fear a cornered animal shows. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. She did not answer. Instead, her trembling hand clutched the collar of her dress, pulling it even tighter. "All right," Silas said. "I am going to pick you up. I have got a horse and some water. You're going to be fine." He slid his arms underneath her. She felt as light as a child, a sick child dressed for a blizzard in the middle of a Texas July. He managed to get her onto Drummer, who for once stood perfectly still. Silas mounted up behind her, pulling her back against his chest. He could feel the heat radiating off her through that thick wool. This dress was killing her, trapping the fever inside her like a furnace. He reached for the top button. That is when she came alive, is when she twisted in his arms with a strength that seemed impossible, clawing at his hand. A raw scream tore from her throat, filled with a pain that made the hair on his arm stand on end. "Do not!" she cried out. "Please do not take it off!" Silas yanked his hand away as if he had touched a hot stove. She immediately collapsed against him, shaking so hard he could feel it in his bones. "Okay," he said, his voice low. "Okay, it stays on. I promise you, it stays on." She went limp against him. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Silas stared at the heavy wool collar and the long sleeves in the 100-degree heat. A cold dread washed over him, a feeling he had not felt since Emmeline. He urged Drummer forward and rode hard for his ranch. carrying a stranger in a dress that made no sense, running from a danger he could not yet see. His ranch house sat where Copper Creek used to run deep. Now the creek was barely a trickle, and the pasture grass was the color of old straw. Silas carried the woman inside and laid her on the bed in the spare room, the one that had belonged to his sister, Emmeline. He pumped cool water into a basin and began placing soaked rags on her forehead and wrists. That dress was a problem. It was a death sentence in this heat. But he had made a promise, and Silas Hall, for all his many faults, was a man of his word. He worked around it, dabbing the outside of the fabric with water and spooning sips between her cracked lips. Even in her fevered sleep, she fought him. Every time his hand strayed near the collar or the cuffs, she would flinch, her fingers clutching the dress like it was the only thing keeping her from falling off a cliff. "Who did this to you?" he asked the quiet room. For 3 full days, she burned with fever, tossing and turning, whispering the same words over and over. "Please do not take it off." The words echoed in his head while he tended his cattle and drank whiskey on the porch late at night, staring at the stars and thinking of Emmeline. On the 4th morning, he brought her some broth and found her sitting up. She was huddled in the corner of the bed, her eyes tracking his every move like he was a rattlesnake. Silas paused in the doorway, holding up the bowl. "It is just beef broth," he said. "Nothing more." He set the bowl on the bedside table and then backed away until he was against the far wall. "My name is Silas Hall," he told her. "This is my place. You have been sick for 3 days. I have not touched your dress, and I am not going to." She watched him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of a lie. "I do not expect your trust," he said, "but I do expect you to eat." Something in her face softened just a little. She reached for the bowl, her hands shaking, and drank the broth in small, careful sips, her eyes never leaving his. When she was done, she set the bowl down. "Cora," she whispered. "Is that your name?" "It is what I am called." "All right then," he said, taking the empty bowl. "There is more if you want it, Cora." He was at the door when her quiet voice stopped him. "Why did you not do it?" He turned back to look at her. "Do what?" "The dress," she said. "You could have taken it off. I was too weak to stop you." A painful memory tightened his chest. "I know," he said softly, "and that is exactly why I did not." He shut the door and walked out onto the porch, gripping the railing until his knuckles were white. He punched a post, splitting the skin. The anger was not for her, but for himself, for remembering another woman with that same haunted look in her eyes. He had seen it before, and had not done enough to help. 2 weeks passed. Cora was like a ghost in his house, always quiet, always watchful. The heat wave got worse, and 2 of his cattle died. One evening, Silas came inside, exhausted and covered in dust, caked in grime and dried blood when he fell into a kitchen chair. "You lost another one." Cora's voice met him from the doorway. He looked up at her, standing there in that same dress she always wore. "Yeah," he muttered. "3rd this month. Your water's too low." He nearly scoffed. "I know my water is low." "No," she said, her voice turning sharp. "You are digging in the wrong spot. The creek is dying because the spring that feeds it shifted. The water table moves out here." Silas just stared at her. "How do you know that?" She glanced away. "I just know things." "That is not an answer. It is the one you are getting." He studied her for a long moment, then got to his feet. "All right, Cora. Show me." She hesitated for a second, then nodded. She led him out beyond the barn to a low place where the grass was a shade greener. She knelt and put her palm flat against the earth. "Dig here," she told him. "About 5 or 6 feet. You will hit it." "And if I do not?" She looked straight at him. "Then you have wasted a day digging, but you will not." He dug. It took him until sunset, but at 5.5 feet the dirt turned to mud. By morning he had a proper well. Silas stared down at the dark water, then glanced at Cora on the porch. He thought he saw the faint hint of a smile. "Well, I will be damned," he said. "Probably," she replied, "but not today." That night, screaming woke Silas from a dead sleep. He grabbed a lamp and hurried to her door. The screams had stopped, replaced by a terrible, quiet whisper. "Please do not take it off, please do not." He put his hand on the door, wanting to go in, but he knew better. Forcing your way into a woman's fear only breaks things for good. So he just sat down on the floor, his back to her door, and he stayed. He listened to her cry and beg until her sobs turned into shaky breaths, and the breathing finally fell quiet. He waited until silence settled into the thin kind of sleep she found. He never moved. His legs fell asleep and his back ached, but he stayed. When the sun started to rise, he heard her door creak open. He looked up to see Cora standing over him, her eyes red and puffy. She stared down at him on the floor. "You stayed?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I stayed." "Why?" He rose slowly, his joints groaning. He looked her square in the eyes and told her the truest thing he knew. "Because the last time someone I cared about needed me to stay, I left. I went to pick a fight instead. And she died because I was too angry to be what she needed." Cora's guarded expression softened just a little. "Who?" "My sister, Emaine." After a moment, she asked, "What happened to her?" Silas went to the kitchen to put on some coffee. Cora followed and sat with him. He told her the story in broken pieces. "She married a man named Virgil Cates. A respected merchant, sat right in the front pew at church. Folks thought he was the finest man around. But he was not." Silas gripped his coffee mug. "Emmeline came to me twice. The first time she had a dark bruise on her arm. Said she fell. I knew she was lying, but she begged me to let it be. So I did. The second time, she had a split lip and a look in her eyes." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "A look just like yours." Cora flinched, but held his gaze. "I lost my temper," Silas continued. "I went to Virgil's store in the middle of the day and beat him something awful in front of half the town. I thought I was saving her." "You were not?" "I made everything worse. The town called me a brute. The sheriff threw me in jail for 2 weeks. While I was locked up, Virgil sent Emmeline away to his family's place up north where I could not find her." The coffee sat untouched between them. "She wrote me one letter," Silas said, his voice low. "Said she was fine. But I could see in her handwriting she was lying. The letters were shaky, like her hand was hurt." "Yes," Cora whispered. "They found her in a river 3 months later. Called it an accident." Virgil played the grieving husband at the funeral. The whole town felt sorry for him. "And you?" "I knew what happened, but I could not prove it. By the time I figured out the right way to handle things with patience and the law, she was already gone." He looked up at Cora. "I learned something from all that. Being angry is not the same as being helpful. And sometimes the hardest thing you can do is just sit down and be quiet." The kitchen was still. Cora's hands lay flat on the table, her sleeves pulled down tight over her wrists. "The man I am running from," she said, her voice barely there. "He is like your Virgil, a merchant, a man people respect, a man whose word is law." Silas felt a chill despite the heat. "Literally," she said, opening her eyes. The look she gave him held all the answers she could not speak. "That is what makes it impossible." Silas held her gaze steady. He did not push for more. He just gave a slow nod. "Impossible is not the same as hopeless," he said. Cora stared at him for a long time. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, but she did not get up to leave. And for now, sitting in that hot kitchen with a man who had stayed on the floor all night for her, that was enough. The world outside was hot and still, and somewhere out there, a powerful man was looking for what he believed was his. They both knew he would come. But not today. A week passed before Cora slept through the night, but something had shifted between them. She stopped shrinking away when Silas was near. She still wore that heavy wool dress that made no sense in the Texas heat, but she wore it differently now. It was less like armor, and more like a habit she did not know how to break. Silas noticed, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Then one Tuesday morning, with the heat so bad the chickens were hiding in the shade, he spoke up. "I am heading into Ridgewater for supplies. Do you need anything?" Cora was at the window watching dust devils dance in the yard. "I need you to buy some cotton fabric," she said, turning to him. "A light color, enough to make a dress." Silas blinked. "You want to make a new dress?" "I want to make something I can breathe in." She tugged at the suffocating wool collar. "This thing is cooking me alive, Silas." "I know that. I always have." "Then why?" "Because what is underneath is worse than being hot," she said, her voice flat. "But I figure if I make something new with my own two hands, maybe I can take this one off without feeling exposed to the whole world." Silas picked up his hat. "What color?" "It does not matter." "It matters to me." "What color?" She looked at him, and for a long moment there was only the sound of the clock ticking. "Blue," she said softly. "A light blue, like the morning sky." He bought the fabric. He also bought thread, needles, and a couple of extra buttons. He did not know the first thing about making a dress, but he figured a woman trying to stitch her life back together deserved good material. When he returned, he put the package on the table. Cora opened it and ran her fingers over the soft cotton. Her whole face seemed to soften. She pressed the fabric to her cheek for a long moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is just cloth." "No," she said, looking at him. "It is not." She started working that evening while Silas sat nearby, cleaning his tack. For the first time, the silence between them felt comfortable. "You are good with those scissors," he commented. "My mother was a seamstress," she said, her hands moving with purpose. "She taught me before I could even read. Said a woman who could sew would never be completely helpless. Smart woman." She was. A pause. "She is gone now." "I am sorry to hear that." "Do not be. She passed before all this happened. She never had to know." Cora cut a long, perfect line through the blue cotton. "That is the one mercy I have." Silas set down the leather he was working on. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "This man you're running from, does he know where you are?" Cora's scissors stopped moving. "No." "Are you sure about that?" "I am sure he does not know yet, but he will look for me," she said suddenly, her voice steady. "He always does, not because he wants me back, but because I know things that could ruin him." Silas met her gaze. "What kind of things?" "The kind of things that get women killed for knowing," she answered. A familiar anger rose in his gut, hot and sharp. He pushed it down. "When you are ready to tell me, I will be ready to listen," he said. "And if you're never ready, I will still be right here." Her hands, which had been trembling, were now steady. For the first time, he saw the faint hint of a smile touch her lips. The next morning, as Silas was digging fence posts, he heard hoofbeats on the road. He straightened up, squinting into the sun. A rider was approaching from the direction of town. It was a big man on a gray horse wearing a dark coat that was far too heavy for the weather. A knot formed in Silas's stomach as the rider reined in at his gate. The man tipped his hat. "Morning. You Silas Holt?" "Depends who's asking," Silas replied. "Name's Dalton, deputy out of Helena." The lawman shifted his weight in the saddle. "I'm on the hunt for a woman, vanished about 6 weeks ago. Her husband's mighty concerned. Silas gripped his post-hole digger, his face a perfect mask. Lot of women in this part of the country, Deputy. This one is particular, Dalton said. Small, with brown hair. Husband says she ain't right in the head. Says she can be a danger. Silas let that hang in the air for a moment. He's a judge, you see. Judge Edmund Ashworth, a respected man who just wants his wife brought home. A chill ran straight through Silas. A judge. That's what she'd told him. Can't say I've seen anyone like that, Silas said flatly. But I'll keep an eye out. Dalton's gaze drifted past him, toward the little house where Silas prayed Cora was keeping herself hidden. Much obliged. You should know, Dalton added, the judge has the legal papers to bring her back. She left a treatment facility without permission. Far as the law is concerned, she's a fugitive. A fugitive. The word sounded wrong. I know how it sounds, Dalton said, but the law's the law, Mr. Holt. Silas watched him ride off before heading back to the house. Cora was standing stiff in the kitchen, her knuckles white where she held the counter. She had heard it all. He called it a facility, she said, her chin high. I call it being locked away without a trial. They said I was hysterical. They told me my own words were proof of my sickness. Silas, that ain't treatment. That's being buried alive with a judge's signature on your tombstone. He pulled a chair out from the table, his own hands shaking with a fury he hadn't felt in a long time. He flattened his palms on the wood. Tell me, he said, his voice low. Tell me everything. And so she did. Her real name was Anne-Marie Holloway. She'd married the charming Judge Edmund Ashworth 3 years back. Every woman in town was jealous of me, she said with a dry, bitter laugh. That lasted about 4 months, right up until I found his ledger. It turned out Edmund ran a place he called the Ashworth Home for Wayward Women. Families paid him a handsome sum to take in inconvenient wives and daughters, women who had their own opinions, who wouldn't obey, or who inherited money someone else wanted. And what does he do to them in there? Silas asked, his jaw tight. Cora's eyes looked somewhere far away. Some are medicated until they can't remember their own names. Others are locked in tiny rooms. And some... Her hand went to her own shoulder, a protective gesture. Some of them get marked. Marked how? He asked. Branded, she whispered, the word landing with a sickening thud. Like cattle. A letter H for hysteric, burned right into their skin. A mark so they can never truly escape, so everyone knows they belong to him. The kitchen felt cold and silent. Silas saw her pain, and a hot, blinding rage filled him up. He stood so fast the chair screeched across the floor. This was the same fury that had gotten Emmeline killed. Silas, Cora's voice cut through the haze. Look at me. He turned. That rage won't save me, she said, her voice steady. I need you to be smart, not angry. The truth in her words was like a splash of cold water. He took a deep breath. You're right. Let's be smart. That deputy, he started, he said Ashworth has a commitment order. That means he has the law on his side. That's right, she agreed. Then we need to get the law on your side, Silas declared. But how? The man we're fighting is the law. Silas rubbed his tired face. There's a lawyer over in Ridgewater. Howard McAllister. He's not fancy, but he's honest. And he's got no love for judges. A judge cost his family their ranch 20 years ago, and he's been fighting the system ever since. He's the kind of man who'll listen to a story like yours and get mad enough to help. There's more, Cora said quietly. There was a fire at the facility the night I got out. Another woman, Ruth, started it. She's the one who showed me the ledger and told me to run. Did she make it out? Silas asked. I don't know, Cora confessed, her voice tight with memory. I just remember smoke, and her telling me to go. The ledger, Silas said. Did you bring it with you? No, it was locked in his office, she explained. But I memorized every name I could. The women who were crossed out, the ones who never left. It's all in my head. Silas looked at her with new understanding. That's it, he said. That's the weapon he's afraid of. That's why he won't ever stop looking for you. We'd better get moving. They rode into Ridgewater the next morning with Cora looking like any other rancher's wife heading to town for supplies. But Margaret Tierney, who ran the general store, missed nothing. Her sharp eyes took in Cora's heavy wool dress, completely wrong for the sweltering heat. Silas Holt, Margaret said. Since when do you keep company? This is Cora, he said simply. Margaret gave Cora a long, measuring look. Honey, ain't you about to melt in that get-up? It's 102 degrees out here. Cora just managed a small smile. Margaret turned back to Silas. McAllister's office is up the street. I figure that's where you're headed. You got that look on your face, the one that means you're about to stir up a whole mess of trouble. Margaret figured they were about to do something both brave and foolish. She poured 2 tall glasses of lemonade. Drink up, she said. Plenty of time for foolishness later. Ka pressed the cold glass to her brow, finding a second of peace. Margaret, Silas began softly. That deputy, Dalton, was back yesterday sniffing around. Margaret's face went grim. He's looking for a lost woman. Small, brown hair. Husband wants her back. She cut her eyes toward Ka. I told him I hadn't seen hide nor hair of her. The whole street told him the same. Why? Silas asked. Margaret slammed her glass down. Because after 31 years of marriage, I know when a man is worried and when he is hunting. He talked about her like she was a stray calf. It turned my stomach. Cora's eyes welled up. Now, don't you start that in here, honey, Margaret said gently. Save your waterworks for when they count. Silas gave Cora's shoulder a quick squeeze. She did not pull away, and he made a note of it. Cora knew he had noticed, and he knew she knew. They did not speak on it. They headed to Howard Millen's office, a cramped space over the feed store that smelled of books and stale smoke. Mellon was a wiry man in his 60s, with a face locked in a permanent scowl. Silas, sit. Who is the lady? This is Cora. She is in need of a lawyer. Mellon grunted. I am not much of one. But you are honest. That is what matters. Millin peered at Cora over his glasses. What is the trouble, miss? Cora sat bolt upright. The kind of trouble a judge's signature gets you into. Millen's eyebrows shot up. Tell me. She told him enough about the marriage, the escape, and the deputy. When she was done, Millin polished his glasses for a long moment. Judge Edmund Ashworth, he finally said. From Silver Falls. Silas leaned in. You know of him? Everyone knows of him. He has got a reputation. A reputation clear to the capital. The governor has him over for supper. The kind of man no one would ever think is a monster, Cora added quietly. Millin nodded grimly. And the kind of man who is nearly impossible to beat in court. We will not just be fighting a piece of paper, miss. We will be fighting his word, and a judge's word around here is gospel. So it is no use, Cora said, her voice hollow. I did not say that, Millin shot back. I said it was hard. There is a world of difference. You mentioned other women at that place? 43 that I knew of. Some must still be alive. Then we need them, Millin declared. One woman's story can be buried. But 10 stories? That is a hurricane not even a judge can ride out. A flicker of something fierce sparked in Cora's eyes. How do we find them? Millin pointed a bony finger at her. With those names you carry in your head. We start there, Millin continued. Someone paid to put them women in there. There is always a paper trail. What about the ledger? Silas asked. If it is real, it would have names, dates, even deaths. That would be enough to see him swing. True, Millin said. But getting that book is not a job for a lawyer. It is dangerous work. They sat in the stifling heat of the small office. I am not asking you to steal any book, Silas, Cora said, her voice firm. And I am not asking you to fight him for me. Just help me stand up and tell my truth. All I want is for someone to believe me. Silas looked at the woman before him, who had endured so much yet still spoke with dignity. You will be believed, Silas promised. I will make dead sure of it. Mlynn got a fresh sheet of paper. All right, Cora, let us have those names. They worked clear through until sunset. Cora pulled 12 names from her memory, and Emlyn wrote them down, building his case piece by piece. Later, as they rode home in the quiet dark, Silas felt her exhaustion as she leaned against him. You did a good thing today, he said. All I did was talk. Sometimes talking is the hardest part. She was silent for a while as the big Montana stars popped out overhead. Silas? Yeah? That new dress, I reckon I will finish it up tomorrow. That is good to hear. Her voice hitched just a little. And then I think, I would like to be rid of this old one for good. I am ready. He held her a bit tighter. Then I will build you a fire. What for? Because some things, he said, are meant to be burned. She said nothing, but her hand found his and held on tight. They both knew a storm was coming. Judge Ashworth was not a man to give up. He would come himself, bringing all his power and fury with him. It was not a question of if, but when. And the only real question was if they would be ready. By sunrise, the new dress was done. Silas found Cora in the kitchen, the blue fabric laid out across her lap. She snipped the final thread and held the dress up. It is finished. It looks good, Cora. It is simple, she said, clutching it to her chest. But it is mine. I chose it. I made it. It is mine. Yes, ma'am, he said softly. It is. She met his gaze. I need you to go outside now. Build that fire. He nodded and went out to the yard, laying stones and kindling. He lit a match and watched the flames take hold. A moment later, the screen door creaked. Cora stepped out, wearing the new blue dress. She did not look like a new person, just like a woman who had finally made up her own mind. She carried the old wool dress, folded neatly and dark as a bad memory. She walked right up to the fire and stood there. Her fingers dug into the old fabric. Her jaw was set hard. You could see the war raging inside her, a battle between the woman who wore this dress as a brand and the one who wore it as a shield. You don't have to go through with this today, Silas said, his voice low. Yes, I do. If I put it off, I'll never do it. She drew a long breath. I've carried his shame for 3 years, Silas. I am done. With that, she heaved the dress into the fire. The thick wool smoldered, curling in on itself and sending up a heavy smoke that stank of fear and old sweat. Cora just watched it burn. She stood perfectly still, her face a mask, and watched until it was nothing but ash. She turned to Silas. It is gone. I thought I would feel different. Give it time. I thought I would feel free. Her voice broke. I just feel bare. Silas took off his hat. That feeling will pass, Cora. I promise. How do you know? Because I burned Emmeline's things too, every last dress and ribbon, every last dress, and for a week I felt like I had lost her all over again. But then one morning I woke up and the weight was just gone. Cora stared at the glowing embers. I want that morning. It is coming. You just have to let it. She nodded, swiped a hand across her face, and went inside. Silas stayed until the last spark died, then he buried the ashes and walked away. The days after that flew by. A letter came from Lynn saying he had found 2 names from Cora's list. 2 women who had been at Ashworth's place and made it out alive. He had written to them both, asking careful questions about the home but never mentioning Cora or Silas by name. Cora poured all her energy into work. She mended fences and hauled water. She organized the barn with a fierce intensity that worried Silas. It was the kind of work a person does when they are trying to outrun their own thoughts. "You're going to run yourself into the ground," Silas told her one afternoon. He watched her stack hay bales nearly as big as she was. "Good. Maybe then I will finally sleep." "You are not sleeping." She dropped a bale, her face slick with sweat. "I sleep just fine, Silas. I heard you last night. Through the wall." She froze. "What did you hear?" "Enough." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto a hay bale, burying her face in her hands. "It is the same dream every night. Edmund is standing over me with the brand. I can smell the hot metal. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. It is like he stole my voice, too." Silas sat near her, keeping a respectful distance. "You got your voice back, Cora. You used it in that lawyer's office. That man did not take it. He just made you forget you had it for a while." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "What if it is not enough? What if I tell the truth and they all look at me the way they looked at Emmeline? They will believe him because he is a judge and I am just what? Just a hysterical woman." The ugly word hung between them. Silas turned to her. "Listen to me. You remembered 43 names. You walked 100 miles in that wool dress in the heat of summer. You are the least hysterical person I have ever known, and I have known some mighty calm horses." She just stared at him. Then something inside her broke open, and a real laugh escaped her, short and surprised. "Did you just compare me to a horse?" "I compared you favorably to a horse. There is a difference." She laughed again, a raw, beautiful sound. Silas felt a stirring in his chest he had not felt in a very long time. He looked away before she could see it in his eyes. "Silas?" "Yeah. Thank you for not being careful with me." He frowned. "What do you mean by that?" "Everyone who knew what happened. They treated me like I was made of glass. Like one wrong word and I would shatter. You do not do that. You argue with me. You made a joke about a horse." She wiped her eyes. "You have no idea how much I needed that." He put his hat back on. "Well, to be fair, Drummer is a very impressive horse. Get out of this barn." "Yes, ma'am." He was nearly to the door when she called out, "Silas." "Yeah." "When he comes." "Yeah." "When?" "Do not let me break." "You are not going to break, Cora," he said, looking back at her. "I have seen what you are made of. That man does not stand a chance." He believed every word. But the truth was, standing in that hot barn, Silas Holt was scared. Not of Judge Ashworth or some U.S. Marshal. He was scared of how much he had come to care for the woman on that hay bale, because caring meant you had something to lose. 4 days later, a rider came out to the ranch. It was Margaret Tierney. Silas met her at the gate. Margaret was not one for social calls. Her being there meant trouble. "Get inside," she said, swinging down from her horse. "Both of you." In the kitchen, Margaret laid her hands flat on the table. "Judge Ashworth is in Ridgewater. He arrived this morning with 2 men. One is a U.S. Marshal named Greer. The other is a doctor." Cora's face lost all its color. "A doctor?" "Dr. Parnell Webb. Ashworth told the sheriff he is a specialist in female disorders." Margaret said the words like they tasted foul. "He has papers." Silas laid his eyes on the official papers, a commitment order stamped with a territorial seal. It was a warrant to bring back Anne-Marie Holloway Ashworth, claiming she was a danger to herself and everyone else, suffering from hysterics and wild notions. Cora grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "He has a warrant. He has a marshal and some doctor ready to swear to it. The man has every angle covered. Silas asked. Where is he now? At the hotel, meeting the sheriff this afternoon. He ain't here to talk, Silas. He's here to take me. Cora stood, her chair scraping hard against the floorboards. She went to the window, turning her back to them and wrapping her arms tight around herself. Silas, she said, her voice a bare whisper. He brought Webb. Dr. Webb was the man who gave the treatments at that place. He was the one, she said, turning around with a dead calm on her face but a fire in her eyes. He's the one who held the brand that burned me. The kitchen fell silent. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Silas felt his own hands ball into fists. Then he just brought a witness against himself, Silas said. He's just too arrogant to see it. He didn't bring a witness, Cora said. He brought a weapon. Webb will say whatever Edmund tells him to. He will declare me unfit, and the marshal will legally and quietly escort me back to that place, and I will just disappear. That is not going to happen, Silas said, his voice low and firm. How? He has the law on his side, Silas. He is the law. Then we break the law. No, Cora said sharply. That's how Emmeline got killed. That's you going to Virgil's store and breaking his jaw. That's anger, not justice. If we use fists and guns, we lose. He becomes the poor victim, and I become the crazy woman he claims I am. Silas stared at her, hating that she was right. Margaret cleared her throat. The girl's got a point, Silas, but she's also got something that man ain't counting on. What's that? Me, Margaret said, straightening up. And about a dozen other women in this town who knew that man was rotten the second he opened his mouth. He came into my store this morning, honey, asking if I'd seen a confused, dangerous woman. I told him no. Then he gave me a smile I've seen on men who think a woman is just part of the furniture. He said, "Women in distress can be mighty convincing, ma'am. It is the nature of their weakness." Said that to my face in my own store. What did you do? Cora asked. I smiled right back and told him I hoped he found what he was looking for. Then I sent Bill to tell every woman on Main Street exactly what that man said. And honey, there ain't a woman in Ridgewater who's going to help Edmund Ashworth find his missing property, because that's what he called you. Cora closed her eyes. He always did. Silas stood up. Margaret, how long till he makes his move? The sheriff told him it'd take a day to get a search party together. That gives us till tomorrow afternoon. That's not enough time. It's what we've got. We need Malin. Already sent for him. He'll be here by evening. Silas looked at Cora. In her blue dress, she looked scared. But she also looked ready. What do you need from me? He asked her. I need you to do something harder than fighting. Name it. I need you to let me face him, not from behind you. I need to stand right in front of Edmund Ashworth and show him I am not afraid anymore, even though I am. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard, Silas said. It's the most terrifying, too. Malin arrived with the sunset, carrying a satchel of papers and a bottle of whiskey. I heard back from Butte, he said, spreading documents on the kitchen table. The woman's name is Helen Cartwright. She was in his facility for 14 months and confirms everything. The drugs, the brandings. She is willing to testify. Cora's hand went to her mouth. Helen. I heard her crying every night in the room next to mine. She's alive, Cora, and she wants to fight. That's one witness, Silas said. Emmeline, you told us we'd need 5, maybe 10. I said that would make it a sure thing. But one witness is enough to challenge his order. It is enough to demand a formal hearing. And if we get a hearing, Ashworth has to show his books. The minute those books are open, he is finished. If the books show what you say, Cora whispered. But the hearing would be with some judge Ashworth knows, some judge who owes him, Silas pointed out. Malin smiled, a sharp, thin thing. Not if we demand a federal hearing. Ashworth is a territorial judge. His power ends at the territorial line. False imprisonment and assault are federal crimes. We can petition for a federal review and take it clear out of his friend's hands." "How long would that take?" Cora asked. "Weeks, maybe months." "I don't have months. He is here now." "I know," Mylin said, "which is why we have to slow him down. We need to make so much public noise he can't just snatch you and vanish. We need witnesses. We need daylight." "The women," Margaret said from the doorway. They all turned. "I told you about the women of Ridgewater. They ain't lawyers or marshals, but they are mothers and wives, and they know what it looks like when a man comes to claim a woman who does not want to be claimed." "What are you suggesting?" Mylin asked. "I am suggesting that tomorrow morning when Judge Ashworth walks down Main Street, he finds every woman in this town standing there, not blocking him, just watching him, being seen." "That won't stop him legally," Mylin said. "No," Margaret agreed, "but it will slow him down. A man like that cares more about his reputation than anything. If the women of Ridgewater are watching, he has to put on a show, and every minute he spends performing is another minute we can use." Cora looked at Margaret. "You would do that for me? You barely know me." Margaret came over and put her hands on Cora's shoulders. "Honey, I don't need to know all the details. I see a woman who in the middle of July wore a winter dress for 3 years so no one could see what a man did to her. I know enough." Cora finally broke. Her face crumpled, and she pressed it into Margaret's shoulder and cried, not silent tears, but deep, ragged sobs. Margaret just held her and let her shake. Silas stepped out onto the porch, gripping the railing. He could hear Cora's cries through the wall, and each one felt like a punch. Mylin came and stood beside him. "You love her," Mylin said. It was not a question. Silas was quiet for a long time. "What I feel doesn't matter." "It matters because it will make you do something stupid, and I need you smart." "I am smart." "You're the man who nearly beat a shopkeeper to death because of what he did to your sister. That story is known all over Ridgewater, Silas. That kind of rage doesn't just disappear. It waits." Silas turned to him. "I know what I did wrong with Emmeline. I went in loud and came out with nothing but blood on my hands and a sister in the ground. I will not make that mistake again." "Even when Ashworth is standing right in front of you? Even when he smiles that smile Margaret mentioned?" Silas's jaw went tight. "Even then." "Good," Mylin said. "Because tomorrow we don't need a cowboy. We need a man who can stand still while his world burns and trust the law to do its job. And if the law fails, then God help us all. But we try the right way first. We owe her that." Inside, the crying had stopped. Silas heard Margaret's low voice and Cora's quiet answer. He looked at Mylin. "First thing in the morning, you file that petition." "Already wrote it up. I will ride for Helena at first light." "And Cora?" "She stays in town with Margaret. If the marshal comes to the ranch, you can honestly say she is not here. It buys us time. She won't like that. She has to survive it." Silas nodded and went back inside. Cora was at the table, her eyes swollen, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. "Cora," Silas said firmly, "tomorrow you are going to stay with Margaret in town." "No, it is not safe here." "Nowhere is safe. At least here I am not hiding." "This is not hiding. It is positioning." Cora looked at him, her eyes tired and red. "You sound like a lawyer." "Heaven forbid," he said, sitting across from her. "Listen, Mylin is filing a federal petition. That is our play. But it takes time. The only way to get that time is to put you somewhere Ashworth cannot just make you disappear. Margaret's store is on Main Street. It is public. If he tries anything there, the whole town will see it. And if the town does not care," Margaret spoke up, "they will care. I will make damn sure of it." Cora looked from one to the other, then closed her eyes and nodded. "All right, I will go." She opened her eyes and fixed them on Silas. "But when he comes to that store, I am not running. I am standing right at that counter and looking him straight in the eye." "I would expect nothing less," Silas said. And Silas? Yeah. When this is all over... Before this all ends, I have to tell you something. The night you sat watch outside my door, that was the first time in 3 long years I felt like a human being. You gave me that gift, Silas. Whatever happens next, you did that. The air in the room stood still. When Silas finally met Cora's eyes, he felt every wall he had built around his heart just crumble. He said, "Nothing is going to happen to you, not while I am still drawing breath." She almost managed a smile. Tomorrow morning, her husband, Judge Edmund Ashworth, would come for her. But Cora Holloway, the woman he had tried to break, would be standing tall, waiting for him. Judge Ashworth walked down Main Street at 9:30, the sun already cooking the dusty road. He moved like a man who owned the ground he walked on. But every woman in Ridgewater was there to meet him, standing silent on their porches, their arms crossed, just watching. Margaret Tierney stood firm in front of her general store. Ashworth tipped his hat. "Good morning, ma'am." He looked right past her. "I am searching for my wife. A small woman, with brown hair. I'm afraid she is not well. Confused, you see." "So your deputy told us last week," Margaret said flatly. "Funny how nobody seems to have seen her." "What I find funny, Judge, is a man who rides 300 miles with a marshal and a doctor just to fetch his wife." "My wife is ill," he insisted, his smile getting tight. "She requires treatment." "I can understand a great many things," Margaret replied, holding his gaze. Finally, Ashworth turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff Boone, I have a warrant. I would like to search the town." Boone shifted his feet, looking mighty uncomfortable. "Judge, I have no reason to believe that woman is even here." "Your warrant is for Silver Falls," the sheriff pointed out. "This here is Ridgewater." Ashworth's smile disappeared completely. Sheriff Boone looked plain scared. Cora could see it clear as day from behind the counter in Margaret's store. He was scared, but he was standing his ground. "I will need to verify that warrant with the territorial office," Boone said, his voice steady enough. "That will take a day or two." "That is unacceptable." "It is the law, Judge, even way out here." Ashworth just stared at Boone for a long, hard moment. Then, slow as you please, he turned his head and looked right at the store window. Right at Cora. Their eyes locked. Cora felt the world fall away. Every part of her wanted to run, to duck behind the counter and hide. That old fear, that old need to obey, rose up in her chest like a flash flood. But she did not move. She stood there in her simple blue dress and looked right back at the man who had branded her. She held his gaze. Her hands were shaking so bad she had to press them flat on the countertop. But she held his gaze. Ashworth gave a slow, cruel smile. Then he turned back to the sheriff. "Take your time, Sheriff Boone. I am a patient man." He walked back to the hotel with his men. The women on the street stood frozen until the hotel door shut behind them. Margaret came back inside. "You all right?" "No," Cora said, her voice shaky. "But I am still here. That is all that matters. He saw me, Margaret. He knows. Of course he knows. This was never a search. It was a show. He wanted you to see him. He wanted you to be afraid. It worked. Did it? From where I stood, it looked like a man who expected a woman to crumble, but she stood tall instead. That shook him, Cora. I saw it. You saw what you wanted to see. I saw a judge who just found out his property grew a backbone." The door opened and Silas came in, his face like stone. He looked at Cora. "I was across the street. I saw it all." "Then you saw me shaking like a leaf." "I saw you stand your ground. That is what I saw. Silas, he will come for me. He will not wait for Boone. He will find another way. Malene is already on it." A couple of hours later, Dr. Parnell Webb walked into the store all by himself. He was a thin man with watery eyes who moved too quietly. He picked up a few things, pretending to look them over. His eyes landed on Cora, who was stacking jars on a shelf. "My," he said softly. That is a lovely blue dress. It suits you so much better than the gray one. Cora froze, then slowly turned to face him. His eyes met hers and she saw it all. He knew her, and he was enjoying every second of her fear. He was certain he owned her. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure," Cora said, her voice a whole lot steadier than she felt. The man smiled. "Oh, but we have. You just might not recall. Memory can be a funny thing with your condition." Margaret stepped right between them. "I think it's time for you to leave my store. I'm just a customer, ma'am." "No, you're not," Margaret said flatly. "You haven't bought a thing. You're a man who walked in here to scare one of my employees, and that's not something I stand for." Webb's smile never faded. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and laid it on the counter. "This is a court order signed by Judge Ashworth. It says the woman known as Anne-Marie Holloway Ashworth must undergo a psychiatric evaluation. If she refuses, it just proves she needs it." Margaret stared at the paper but didn't touch it. "Get out of my store." Webb looked past her, right at Cora. "This is going to happen, Anne-Marie, sooner or later. And we both know what the good doctor will find." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We both remember what happened, don't we?" Something inside Cora didn't just break, it sharpened. "I remember every last thing, Doctor," she said, her voice quiet but hard as a nail. "I remember the restraints and the smell of the brand heating up. I remember you holding me down while it burned into my skin. I remember the names of 12 women who died under your watch. I remember Helen Cartwright screaming your name every single night for 14 months. Webb's smile finally wavered. "And I remember your ledger, page 47, an entry from March 12th. For a patient named Ruth Beckons, the treatment was prolonged submersion. The outcome you wrote was expired." Cora took a step closer, the fear gone. "You wrote expired like she was a carton of bad milk. So yes, Doctor, I remember. The only question is, are you ready for everyone else to remember with me?" Webb snatched the document off the counter and hurried out the door, moving almost at a run. Margaret let out a long breath. "Good Lord." "He's running scared," Cora said, a tremor in her hands but not in her voice. "Edmund promised him this would be quick and quiet. Just come get the patient, and no one would ask a thing. Well, it's not quiet anymore." Silas came out from the back room. "That part about the ledger, page 47, was that real?" "I memorized every page I could get my hands on." "How many was that?" 16 pages. Edmund left the drawer unlocked one night. I had maybe 20 minutes and I burned every word into my mind. It was 16 pages of names, dates, and what he called treatments. It is 16 pages of solid proof. If we can get that hearing, and if Helen Cartwright speaks up and I recite what I saw, a federal judge will have to look into it. The records will either prove I'm right or they won't. And if Edmund got rid of that ledger, well, that's a crime all on its own." Silas just looked at her. "You have been planning this for a while." "For 3 long years," Cora said. "I wasn't just having nightmares, Silas. I was building my case." That afternoon, the fight shifted from words to paper. Marshal Greer showed up at 4 o'clock with a second warrant, this one from Judge Ashworth himself. It ordered Cora, or Anne-Marie, to be taken into Dr. Webb's custody right then and there. Greer looked like a man who was tired of his job. He placed the warrant on the counter. "Ma'am, I have to serve this paper. You can come along quietly, or I'm authorized to—" "To what?" Silas challenged, stepping forward. "Drag her through town for everyone to see?" "I don't want any trouble here, Mr. Holt." "Then you shouldn't have brought any with you." Just then, Sheriff Boone appeared in the doorway, catching his breath. "Greer, you hold on a minute. I just got a wire from Helena." Everyone froze. Boone held up a slip of paper. "The federal court has received a petition about Anne-Marie Holloway Ashworth's commitment. Until they review it, all local actions are on hold." "On hold?" Greer asked, confused. "That means your warrant isn't worth a thing right now," Boone explained. "Not until a federal judge says otherwise." Judge Ashworth won't like that one bit. Judge Ashworth doesn't get a say in it. Federal law trumps territorial law. That's in the Constitution. Cora sank into a chair, her legs giving out. She covered her face and took a deep, ragged breath, feeling a knot in her chest finally come loose after 3 years. Silas put a hand on her shoulder and she reached up to hold it. "It's not over," she whispered. "No," he said. "But now he is not the only one with official papers." Greer picked up his useless warrant and left. A few minutes later, a loud crash echoed from the hotel across the street. The sound of glass, or maybe the composure of a man who is not used to being told no. Margaret set 4 glasses on the counter and poured whiskey. "I'd say this calls for a drink." "This calls for about 10 drinks," Boone said. "But I'll start with 1. Cora held her glass but didn't drink. "He won't leave," she said quietly. "This buys us some time, but Edmund won't give up. He'll find another way. He'll try to ruin my name before the hearing, tell everyone I'm crazy or dangerous." "Let him try," Margaret said. "The women in this town know who to believe." "Not everyone will," Cora argued. "Edmund is a smooth talker. He'll buy drinks, shake hands, and tell a sad story about his poor sick wife. Some folks will believe him because it's easier to believe a judge than a woman with scars." The room fell silent. They all knew she was right. Silas put his glass down. "Then we don't sit around and wait. We take the fight straight to him." "How do we do that?" "We need more voices," Cora said, an idea forming. "Helen Cartwright is one. But what about the other names from that ledger? I bet some of their families are right here in Montana. I want to find every woman who survived that place and every family who lost someone. I want them all right here in Ridgewater for that hearing." "That could take you weeks," Silas said. "Then I'd best get riding," he answered. Cora walked over to him and put her hands on his chest. "Come back," she said softly. "I always do. Your sister never got the chance to say that to you, so I am saying it now. Come back to me, Silas." He covered her hands with his own. "I will come back to you, Cora. That is a promise I will not break." She looked him in the eye for a long moment, then stepped back. "While he is gone," she said, turning to Margaret, "we have our own work to do. I am going to write down every word from those 16 pages. Names, dates, outcomes, everything. And then we are going to send a copy to every newspaper within 200 miles. A slow grin spread across Margaret's face. "Now that's what I'm talking about." Silas rode out that evening with a list of names Cora had given him. He had a long ride ahead, a chance to build a wall of truth so high that not even a judge could climb over it. Cora watched him from the porch until he was just a speck on the horizon. Then she went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and picked up her pen. She closed her eyes for a second, took a breath, and began to write. Page 1. Mary Ellen Cook, admitted September 14th, 1862. Treatment: forced sedation. Page 2. Louise Dennison, admitted January 3rd, 1863. Treatment: isolation. Outcome: expired. The names kept coming, a steady flow of ink and memory. Far away, Silas pushed his horse hard through the twilight, carrying a list of the dead and the damaged, in a race against a powerful man who had never known what it was like to lose. On the 8th day, Silas returned. Cora was behind the counter when she heard the horses. She looked out the window and saw him, thinner and darker from the sun, but sitting tall. And right behind him, in a wagon, were 4 other women. A wagon rumbled down the road, driven by a stout woman with iron-gray hair. But Cora only saw the passenger in the back. It was a small woman with a face so thin it was all cheekbones and shadows. Cora knew those eyes before she even knew the face. It was Helen. The pen fell from her hand, and she was out the door in a flash. Helen Cartwright climbed down, looking smaller and older than Cora remembered. Her hands shook, but when she saw Cora, her whole face broke open. Her voice was a cracked whisper. Anne-Marie, you are alive. I am alive, Cora said. Helen's eyes welled up. I thought, after the fire. Ruth pushed me through the window, Cora said softly. I know Ruth did not make it. They embraced, right there in the dusty street, two souls who had clawed their way out of the same nightmare. And the sound that came from Helen, a deep, mournful cry, brought other women to their porches. Silas swung down from his horse, his face worn with exhaustion and relief. Over Helen's shoulder, his eyes met Cora's. There was an urgency in his gaze. We have to talk, he said. Inside, they gathered around the small kitchen table. Silas introduced the other women. There was Agnes, the tough woman who drove the wagon who lost her daughter in that place, and Sarah Jane, whose husband sent her away to steal her inheritance, and young Clara, who had escaped 2 years before Cora. Every one of them has a story, Silas said, and they are all ready to tell it. To who? Cora asked. The hearing is not even scheduled. Silas pulled a folded paper from his coat. It is now. A federal judge, Harlan Pierce, gets to Bridgewater in 3 days. He is here to listen to testimony about your commitment. 3 days. Cora felt the air leave her lungs. Edmund will try to stop it. He is already trying, Silas said, looking at Margaret. What happened while I was gone? Margaret's arms crossed. Plenty. The man has been busy buying friends and painting you as a criminal. He has told everyone his poor sick wife is being held by a violent rancher. He even donated $50 to the church. Did it work? Cora asked. Some of the men believe him, Margaret admitted. But the women of this town are not so easily fooled. Cora turned to Helen, who was staring at a cup of water. Helen, can you do this? Can you stand up in front of a judge and tell him what happened? Helen looked up, her eyes wet but fierce. I have been silent for 6 years, Anne-Marie. 6 years I have woken up with his name on my tongue. 6 years I have hidden this. She pushed up her sleeve. On her forearm was a ragged scar, a brand in the shape of an H. I am done being quiet. Then Clara, a young woman with fire in her red hair, spoke up. Her voice trembled but held steady. He told my family I was hysterical because I refused to marry a man I did not love. That was my crime. Agnes, the oldest of the group, slammed her hand on the table, making the cups jump. My daughter was 19. He took her and I never saw her again. He told me she died of a fever and sent me a bill for the burial. A bill for putting my child in a hole like she was nothing. The room fell silent. Cora reached out and took Agnes's hand. We will make them hear her name. You are darn right we will, Agnes said. The next 3 days felt like a lifetime. On the first day, Edmund's lawyer tried to argue that the federal judge had no authority. Emmeline, Cora's lawyer, shut that down fast. On the second day, Dr. Webb cornered Helen in the street. Margaret told Cora about it later. He got real close and whispered, Do you want people knowing how you behaved in there, Helen? I have records of everything. Helen looked that man square in the eye. She said, I behaved that way because I was trying to stop you from hurting the woman in the next room. Her name was Ruth, and she is dead because of you. Then she just walked away. Cora felt a chill. He is trying to break them. He is failing, Margaret said. On the morning of the hearing, Edmund made his final play. Silas was getting the wagon ready when Sheriff Boone rode up, his face pale as a ghost. Silas, we have a big problem. What kind? Ashworth filed a criminal complaint against you this morning, kidnapping and assault. He has got a warrant for your arrest. If you ride into town, they will take you. The hearing is today, Silas said, his voice dangerously low. He understood it all in a flash. He is not trying to win. He is just trying to keep me from being there. If I am in a cell, Cora is alone, Silas said. She is not alone, Boone said, but she needs me. Ride into town and you will be in jail before you even see the courthouse. Silas gripped the porch rail, fighting down a hot wave of rage. "There is another way in," he said. "The back road past the mill." "Silas, if they see you, then I will be the best-dressed man in your jail cell. Are you going to stop me?" The sheriff just looked at him for a long moment, then turned his horse. "I did not see you this morning, Silas. Nobody was home." Silas took the back road. He found Emlyn waiting for him at the courthouse. "I heard you are a wanted man," Mullen said. "We will deal with that later. Get inside and sit down." The hearing room was packed. The women of the town filled one side. On the other sat Edmund Ashworth, looking like the perfect grieving husband, with Dr. Webb and the marshal beside him. At the front sat Judge Harlan Pierce. He was an old man with eyes that looked like they had heard every lie ever told, and could still spot the truth a mile away. "This hearing is now open," the judge said. "Mrs. Ashworth, are you present?" Cora stood, tall and straight in her blue dress. "I am here, Your Honor." "Do you have a lawyer?" "Howard Emlyn, sir," the judge nodded. "Counsel, you may begin." Emlyn stood up, adjusting his old spectacles. "Your Honor, my client was sent to that facility without a trial and without her consent. She was held there for 11 months. During that time, she was drugged, tied down, and—" He paused, letting the room get quiet. "She was branded with a hot iron on the direct order of her husband, administered by Dr. Parnell Webb." A gasp went through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand for silence, his eyes fixed on Mullen. "Those are very serious accusations, Mr. Mullen." Cora went first at the hearing. She told her story from the very start, clear and steady. She talked about the wedding, the first time Edmund hit her, and the ledger she found locked in his desk. She told them about the night they dragged her from her bed to a room with no windows. When she described the branding, how it smelled and sounded while Dr. Webb held her down, 3 women in the gallery gasped. Judge Ashworth just sat there, watching his wife with the calm look of a man who believed his word was law. Then Helen showed the scars on her arms. One by one, 4 women stood up and told their truths. Agnes went last. "My girl's name was Lily," she said, her voice trembling. "She was 19 years old. She loved to sing, even though she could not carry a tune in a bucket. Judge Ashworth told me she died of a fever. He charged me $12 for a burial I could not even attend." The courtroom was dead silent. Ashworth's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, these are just emotional stories with no proof." "There are records," Cora said, her voice ringing out. "There is a ledger in a locked drawer in the judge's office. I saw 16 pages. I memorized them all. 12 women are listed as expired. 12 women are dead. If I am lying," she challenged, "then open the drawer. Then that ledger will not match my story. But if I am truthful, it will." Pierce turned to Ashworth. "Judge, is there such a book?" For the first time, Ashworth's calm faltered. Just a flicker in his eyes. But they all saw it. "We keep standard medical files as the law demands," he said stiffly. "Then you will have no problem with the federal inspection of those files." The silence stretched just a hair too long. "Of course not." "Good. I am ordering one. Marshals will be there within 7 days." Pierce settled his glasses back on his nose. "In the meantime, the commitment order for Cora is thrown out. She is a free woman. Anyone who tries to detain her will be charged with kidnapping." Cora nearly went to her knees, but Emlyn was there to steady her. "And another thing," Pierce said, staring down Ashworth. "The complaint against Silas Hole is dismissed, since the order it was based on is now worthless." "Sit down, Judge Ashworth," the federal judge ordered. "You are not on the bench today. This hearing is adjourned. Mrs. Ashworth, you are free to go." The courtroom exploded. The women of Ridgewater swarmed Cora. Margaret was the first to reach her, pulling her into a fierce hug. Cora's eyes filled with tears of relief as she looked through the crowd and saw Silas. He was standing by the back wall, his hat in his hands, just watching her with a quiet pride. He didn't need to push his way through the crowd. He had been her rock, steady and true, from the very beginning. The crowd parted as she walked toward him. "You came back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you I would," he answered, his eyes saying everything that words could not. "You're wanted for kidnapping, Silas Hall," Cora said, and then a true, full-bodied laugh spilled out of her. "Not anymore. You are not." She laid her hands right on his chest, feeling his heart pounding like a drum. "You are the most stubborn, infuriating, and patient man I have ever had the good fortune to know." He just looked at her. "Yes, ma'am." She was not finished. "You sat on a cold, hard floor all night outside my door. You dug a well because I told you to. You rode clear across Montana to bring back 4 strangers, all to fight for a woman you found half dead in the dirt." Her voice got thick with tears. "Why?" His answer was simple and true. "Because you deserved someone who stayed." And right there in the courthouse, in front of the whole town of Bridgewater, she kissed him. The room went dead silent, then erupted in cheers, with Margaret likely clapping the loudest. Just 3 weeks later, federal marshals found the ledger. Every name, every date proved Cora had been telling the gospel truth. They arrested Edmund Ashworth in his fancy hotel room, still claiming he was innocent. Dr. Parnell Webb was arrested that very same day, and they shut that awful facility down for good. 14 women walked out into the sunlight. Agnes Dooley found her daughter Lily's grave right where Cora said it would be. She finally brought her little girl home and buried her proper with a real headstone and flowers. Malin, the lawyer, suddenly had more work than he knew what to do with. Soon enough, Cora's story was on the front page of the Bridgewater Gazette, and it got picked up by papers all across the territory. Letters started pouring in from women who had been locked away and silenced, women who read Cora's words and finally felt brave enough to believe their own. One evening in late August, Silas and Cora stood on the porch of the ranch house. The heat had finally broke. "Mlyn says the trial will be in Helena," Cora said quietly. "He wants me to testify again." "Will you?" Silas asked. "Every single time they ask," she said. "For every woman in that book. For Ruth, for Lily, for all of them." He reached for her hand and she took it. "Cora," he started. "That blue dress. You never did tell me. Why blue?" She looked down at the simple cotton dress she had sewn so long ago. "Well," she said, her hand stroking the fabric, "when I was in that room, the one with no windows, I would close my eyes and try to remember what the morning sky looked like, that soft, pale blue before the sun gets too bright. I told myself if I ever got out, I would wear that color every day, so I would never forget what freedom looked like." Silas gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You are free now." "I know," she said, leaning against him. "But I am more than free, Silas. I am home." He wrapped his arm around her, and they just stood there. 2 folks who had once failed to save someone they loved, who had carried that weight like a stone. But somehow, through plain old stubbornness and patience, they had found a way to set that stone down and carry on, together. And in that small Montana town, a simple blue dress, plain as day, hung on a line, dancing in the summer wind. It was not much, but it was hers. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.